The artworks and sculptures in the Sistine Chapel are some of the greatest commissioned in the world, as they were created by famous artists such as Bernini, Michelangelo, and Raphael. In this video, we will discuss all the art, history, and the different rooms of the Sistine Chapel so you can truly understand this artistic marvel. In the early history of the famous chapel, it was actually a part of the papal quarters of Pope Sixtus VI. Try saying that 5 times. It was designed by the Dominican friar Fra Angelico, who was very famous for creating artworks in abbeys at the time. Keep in mind that this was nearly a century before the era of Da Vinci, Michelangelo, or Raphael. So, the Sistine Chapel was used as a meeting room for the popes and other famous kings like the Holy Roman Emperor or the Duchy of Milan. Let's talk about probably the most famous artist or sculptor who worked in the chapel, Michelangelo. He was a famous Florentine sculptor, and he was renowned for creating such famous pieces as the David, which you can see right here. Actually, Michelangelo wasn't a painter, he was only a sculptor, so he was very confused when the papacy hired him. They hired him to spread his influence because the papacy was actually accused at that time of not supporting Florence. So if they hired a famous Florentine sculptor, then it would clear their name. This inexperience with painting is actually clearly shown in multiple of Michelangelo's works, where there's a lack of detail or the humans are a lot bigger than they should be. Sometimes he even includes himself in the paintings, which was considered very bad in the olden times. For example, in this painting of Saint Bartholomew, this is literally just Michelangelo wearing saintly clothing. If the Pope knew this, Michelangelo would be fired on the spot, or even executed or excommunicated for his actions. Now let's go to the first main room of the Sistine Chapel. This room is the map room. It is one of the most famous in the chapel. The crest of this room contains the Greek and Roman muses for geography and maps, along with Urban the Eighth or Urbanus the Eighth, who was the commissioner of the room, because of his great interest in science and geography. The maps were created by Ignacio Dante, who was Leonardo da Vinci's teacher. The room contains maps of the Italian subcontinent and much more. For example, on this map, there are cities, mountains, lakes, and even sites of famous battles that involve the Pope or their allies. The maps even depict famous scenes, like where Charlemagne was crowned or where Caesar crossed into Italy after being exiled. This river was known as the Rubicon, and you can see it on this map in the left. The maps of different cities are extremely accurate, like this map of the canal city Venice. A fun fact about this room is that the map of Corsica is actually upside down. Let's move on to the next room, the Tapestry Room. This room is one of the oldest in the chapel. It contains very intricate tapestries that include precious metals woven in, such as gold and silver. Some of these mosaics include the life of Jesus and the tapestry of the science Pope Urban VII, not to be confused with the geography Pope Urban VIII. In fact, the mosaic of Jesus actually follows your eyes wherever you go, as you can see in this photo. This technique in tapestries is called foreshortening, where the painting's eyes move with you as you walk. The ceiling of the tapestry room and the map room are some of the most finely decorated in the entire world. It even seems as if it wasn't painted but sculpted instead. The artists of the chapel even used precious metals for the ceiling as well. For example, this image of the goddess contains a massive amounts of gold and lapis lazuli. The floor of the chapel is mostly Carrara marble, which was used for sculptures and was extremely expensive. There are some cases where precious metals were used in the construction of the floor of the chapel, as in this image of a comet, which clearly contains a lot of lapis lazuli and silver for the comet. Lastly, the domes of the Sistine Chapel are freestanding and so well calculated and measured that they don't even need any stabilizers like the domes have today. Now, let's talk about the most famous part of the Sistine Chapel, the ceiling. It was completed over 20 years by Michelangelo, and he developed neck and spinal problems after finishing the huge painting. A funny fact about the making of the Sistine Chapel ceiling was that there was an annoying servant of the Pope that Michelangelo wanted to have fired. But the Pope at the time, Julius II, refused, so he decided to take revenge in another way by drawing the servant as Satan and having snakes curl around him and biting him in all kinds of places. The servant never noticed this, but he indirectly took revenge of this by being one of the figureheads in the movement to cover the private parts of different saints in Michelangelo's famous Last Judgment painting. He was also involved in the fig leaf campaign, which was basically a campaign where they would sculpt fig leaves over the private parts of different sculptures over the Sistine Chapel to make it appropriate and proper for the Christian religion. Michelangelo would have hated all this because he actually had to scrape off the plaster paint of his Last Judgment and break his sculptures to recoat them in appropriate manners. But Michelangelo was bedridden and on death's door at this point, so we sadly never heard about this turn of events.